The first ships came down on a Wednesday. They punched through the clouds over the southern United States like burning nails, white-hot against a blue spring sky, and by noon, every screen in America was showing the same impossible footage. Great black wedges lowering over pine forest, farmland, truck stops, and church steeples. The official explanations changed by the hour. Unknown aerial craft, hostile non-human incursion, stay indoors, await federal guidance. By sunset, the guidance had stopped mattering. The aliens had chosen their beachhead in southern red clay country, where the roads curled through swamp edges and pine stands, where old farmhouses sat back from the highway, where everyone knew who belonged and who did not. They landed near Willow Creek, a small town with one flashing caution light, 2 churches, a bait shop, a feed store, a Dollar General, and enough unregistered rifles to start a minor republic. The invaders called themselves the Varesh Dominion. They were disciplined, advanced, and physically impressive by the standards of most species they had conquered. Tall, segmented armor, multi-lensed helmets, directed energy rifles, drone support, shock vehicles, portable field barriers. They had broken military outposts on 2 other continents before the United States even understood where the first wave was landing. Their strategists had selected the region precisely because it looked underdefended. Sparse population, light infrastructure, limited formal resistance, easy ground to hold while heavier occupation columns arrived. That was their first mistake. Their second was assuming that the people of Willow Creek would respond like civilians. By the time the first Varesh patrols spread through the area, the town had already gone dark on purpose. No porch lights, no tractor sheds lit, no cell phones left on, no diesel pumps running, the streets emptied as if the whole place had vanished. But the woods had not gone empty. The woods had gone watching. Patrol Leader Kelt of the 9th Forward Survey Unit moved through the pines just after midnight on the first night of occupation, stepping over roots and needle beds lit faintly green by his visor. He had 6 troopers with him. Their mission was routine: survey structures outside the town perimeter, identify food stores, fuel reserves, and any human holdouts too slow or frightened to evacuate. Command wanted the outskirts pacified before dawn. A clean occupation, visible control. The woods were old and dense, the kind that swallowed sound. Moss hung from branches in silver curtains. The air was wet and warm and smelled of mud, leaf mold, and something sweet rotting under the trees. Kelt hated it. His species preferred open ground and structured sight lines. These forests felt like being digested. Then they heard music, thin, soft, twanging through the dark. One of his troopers angled his weapon upslope. Source ahead. Kelt signaled advance. They pushed through the trees and emerged into a moonlit clearing where a shack leaned crooked beside a rusted truck and a stack of split firewood. Yellow light glowed behind thin curtains. Wind chimes clicked softly under the porch eaves. And there, in a rocking chair on the porch, sat an old human woman in a faded floral dress, calmly playing a banjo. She did not stop when she saw them. She did not scream. She did not even look particularly surprised. She just kept plucking that strange, sharp little tune while the alien patrol fanned out below her steps. Kelt stepped forward and activated the translator. "Human civilian, this region is under Varesh Dominion control. You will comply with occupation directives." The old woman spat tobacco juice off the porch. "Y'all ain't from around here." Kelt's mandibles tightened. "You will identify all human resistance elements in this area." She looked at him then, slow and measuring. "Honey," she said, "if I was you, I wouldn't stand there." The troopers raised their rifles. Kelt took another step. "You are in no position to issue warnings." The old woman stopped playing. The last note hung in the clearing like a thread. Then the woods exploded. Gunfire cracked from 3 sides at once, deafening in the night. Not military bursts, Not precise energy discharges, deep, ugly rifle thunder, shotgun booms, high-velocity snaps punching through armor seams and visor joints. The first trooper lost his head. The second spun backward off the path, chest plate blown open. A third tried to deploy a shield drone and took a round through the neck before it cleared his wrist. Kelt shouted for formation, but the forest kept firing from impossible angles. Muzzle flashes blinked between trees, behind stumps, from inside brush piles. The rounds were primitive, kinetic, barbaric. Exactly the sort of ammunition his species had stopped respecting centuries earlier. Which was perhaps why it worked so well. 2 more troopers hit the ground before they could even identify targets. The last one made it as far as the shack steps. The old woman calmly picked up a double-barreled shotgun that had been leaning beside her chair and took him under the chin. Kelt turned to run. Something hit the side of his helmet like a thrown hammer. The world snapped white, then black. He woke to banjo music, soft this time, cheerful. His hands were bound behind him. His armor had been removed. He was tied upright to a chair beneath strings of colored lights. The air smelled like charcoal smoke, motor oil, spilled beer, and cooked meat. For several seconds, Kelt thought his senses were broken. Then he realized the horror was real. He was inside a large barn or machine shed, bright with work lamps and crowded with humans. Men in camouflage caps, women in boots and denim, teenagers carrying trays. A little girl asleep in a lawn chair with hearing protection still around her neck. Coolers lined the wall. Country music played low under the banjo. Someone was laughing near a smoker pit out back. And hanging from meat hooks at the far end of the shed were his soldiers. Not butchered, arranged. The humans were skinning sections of their armor from them, cleaning them with brushes, stuffing cavities with newspaper and packing material, mounting their heads and forelimbs in grotesque poses. Taxidermy. Kelt made a choked sound. A tall man in overalls glanced over from his workbench. "Well, look at there. He's awake." Several humans turned and grinned. The old woman from the porch sat nearby in the same rocking chair, banjo in her lap, as if this were all a church social. She nodded toward Kelt. "Evening, sugar." Kelt strained against the ropes. "What? What are you doing?" The translator around his neck rendered his terror in clipped English. The tall man wiped his hands on a rag. "Memorializing." Another human, younger, sipping beer from a can, said, "Naw, Earl. Memorializing sounds respectful." A woman at a folding table looked up from trimming alien hide. "Decorating. We are decorating." The barn erupted in laughter. Kelt stared at the bodies of his patrol. Their limbs had been wired into poses. One looked like it was reaching for the moonshine still in the corner. Another had been seated on an overturned bucket with a fishing rod propped in its hands. A wooden sign hung above them. "Welcome to Willow Creek." Kelt's breathing became ragged. The old woman began picking softly at the banjo again. "You come on my porch at midnight with all that shiny nonsense," she said. "Course the boys was going to get excited." He twisted toward her. "This is savagery." Earl leaned close enough for Kelt to smell beer and gunpowder on his breath. "Buddy," he said, smiling with tobacco-stained teeth, "we ain't even warmed up." The humans made him watch for another hour. They drank, they laughed, they argued over whether the taller dead alien should go in the VFW hall or the bait shop. Someone brought out a jar of pickled eggs. A boy asked if he could keep one of the helmets. A woman from town took photographs with a disposable camera and said the federal government would probably ruin everything if they got here too early. At last, the old woman stood and walked over to Kelt. She was tiny up close, thin wrists, veined hands, cataract cloud in one eye, more terrifying than any soldier he had ever faced. She cut his bonds. Kelt nearly fell over from numbness and shock. She pointed toward the open barn doors, toward the woods beyond. "Go on," she said. He stared. She smiled pleasantly. "Tell him." Kelt stumbled backward. "Why would you let me live?" The old woman tilted her head. "Fear travels better with witnesses." By dawn, half the Varesh perimeter had gone missing. Vehicles were found burned out along logging roads. Drone teams disappeared over drainage ditches and creek crossings. One squad was discovered sealed inside its own troop carrier, every hatch welded shut from the outside, the interior filled with hornets and gasoline fumes. The occupiers did what disciplined invaders always did when the first days turned bad. They centralized command, they fortified, they swept. They assumed the violence came from a few unusual locals and that concentration of force would end it. Instead, Willow Creek held a town meeting. It happened in the Fellowship Hall of First Baptist, because that was the only building with enough folding chairs left unbroken and enough coffee to sustain collective outrage. The cross still hung over the stage. Generator power hummed outside. Pickup trucks ringed the gravel lot. Shotguns leaned against hymnbook racks. Men and women in hunting camo filled the room shoulder to shoulder while children colored at the back table under the supervision of grandmothers loading magazines. Mayor Darnell Pruitt, who also owned the feed store and had not slept in 30 hours, stood at the pulpit and banged a crescent wrench against the microphone stand. "All right now, settle down." The room quieted in waves. At the far side, somebody muttered, "Tell Ronnie Haskins to settle down, he already got 12. Ronnie shouted back, "2 of them was officers. Counts different." "Alien's an alien," somebody else said. Mayor Pruitt raised both hands. "This is exactly why we are having this meeting." He took off his cap, wiped his head, and looked out over the crowd with the solemn exhaustion of a man trying to explain arithmetic to people who had been hunting since infancy. "We got more families wanting in on this than we got aliens left wandering the county. So from this point forward, every hunting family is limited to 10. The room erupted. 10. Now hold on. My nephews ain't even got started. What about church groups? Mayor Pruitt pounded the wrench again. 10 each. Per family, not per person. We are not having the McCrearys run up the score just 'cause they breed like squirrels. Laughter rolled through the hall. A woman in the second row stood up. Does roadkill count? What roadkill? The one Jimmy dragged in on the front of his four-wheeler. Mayor Pruitt pinched the bridge of his nose. If it was accidental, no. Worn accidental, Jimmy said proudly from the back. I lined him up. Then it counts. A groan rose around the room. One older man wearing snake boots and a Vietnam veteran cap asked, What if they come onto your property? Mayor Pruitt answered without hesitation. Castle doctrine! Do what you gotta do! There was a murmur of satisfied agreement. Then old Miss Hattie, the banjo woman from the porch, rose from her folding chair in the front row. The room quieted immediately. She looked around slowly and said, Y'all need to save some of the bigger ones for mounting. Nobody laughed. That was not because it was not funny. It was because everyone agreed. The Varesh learned too late that formal superiority meant nothing in terrain ruled by memory. The people around Willow Creek knew every creek bed, deer trail, drainage pipe, abandoned shack, crawl space, tree stand, and logging cut for 20 miles. They knew which roads flooded, which bridges rattled, which dogs barked at strangers, which gravel drives dead-ended at ponds, and which old men lied when they said they couldn't hear a truck from half a mile away. Every pond blind might hold 3 cousins and a cooler. Every barn might have murder holes cut into the loft. The woods themselves seemed to cooperate. Patrols lost signal. Mud swallowed tracked vehicles. Homemade bait lines lured squads into hog traps, sink pits, and crossfires rigged from fertilizer bombs and old propane tanks. The invaders started finding signs nailed to trees in English and Varesh trade glyphs. You are being tracked. This is private property. Turn around if you like breathing. One entire 8-man unit vanished near Bell Creek and was later discovered arranged around a campfire in lawn chairs, beer cans wired into their rigid hands. as though they had joined the party voluntarily. A note pinned to the biggest one's chest read, "Bag limit reached." By the 5th day, the Varesh foothold around Willow Creek had collapsed from an occupation into a siege. By the 6th, they were evacuating. By the 7th, only a few survivors made it back to the landing site. Commander Thal received the survivors in a field command shelter overlooking the scorched remains of the original beachhead, where wrecked skimmers sat half-sunk in red mud, and the once orderly staging lanes now looked as though a tornado had chewed through an armory. Only 9 survivors remained from the local occupation force, 9 out of nearly 200. They stood shaking beneath medical lamps while drones stitched wounds and scanned for internal trauma. Patrol leader Kelt, helmet gone, one eye still swollen from the porch ambush, gave the debrief personally. His voice was flat at first, numb. Then, as he spoke, it began to fray. He described the old woman with the banjo, the hidden rifle teams in the woods, the barn, the taxidermy, the laughter, the town meeting. Yes, a meeting, he insisted, where the humans had calmly rationed the killing so there was enough to go around. At that, one of the surviving commanders barked, "That is absurd!" Kelt turned on him with such raw panic that the shelter fell silent. "I heard them," he said. "They argued over quotas." No one interrupted after that. Kelt laughed once. It sounded wrong, close to a sob. "No," he said. "They behave like this is theirs." Commander Thal stood in silence for a long while. Then he asked the question none of them wanted voiced. "If this region was so lethal," he said carefully, "why were broader human military forces not engaged?" Kelt stared at him. "Because," he said, "those were not the military." Nobody spoke after that. Another survivor described a farmhouse where a family had pretended to surrender, then dropped 2 Varesh soldiers through a trapdoor into a root cellar full of sharpened antlers. Another spoke of thermal drones fooled by roasting pig carcasses hung through the woods while human hunters circled behind them. Another, younger and barely coherent, described being chased for 3 miles by a lifted truck with floodlights mounted on the roll bar and something screaming from the bed that might once have been one of their own. "They do not behave like civilians," he whispered. Commander Thal ended the debrief and transmitted a high-priority strategic revision to the orbiting command fleet. His summary was brief. Human species classification amended. Planetary invasion viability, catastrophically uncertain. Local resistance capacity, extreme. Rural armed populations represent irregular warfare hazard beyond modeling range. Recommend immediate reassessment. The fleet admiral read the report, listened to the attached witness accounts, and created a new doctrinal category reserved for species whose unpredictability made conquest a net civilizational risk. He marked humanity. Never invade. A week later, the United States military finally arrived in force. Columns of armored vehicles rolled south under helicopter cover. Drones swept the shattered invasion zone. News networks, now operating from safer distance, spoke breathlessly of the counteroffensive and imminent liberation of the occupied area. The 1st Cavalry Unit coming down Highway 18 outside Willow Creek passed a battered Ford F-250 heading the other direction at an easy 45 miles per hour. The truck was mud-splattered, one door a different color than the rest, gun rack full, coolers lashed in the bed. And mounted on the hood, bolted proudly where an ornament should never be, was an alien head. The driver, a broad man in mirrored sunglasses, gave the convoy a polite 2-finger wave as he passed. No one in the lead vehicle spoke for several seconds. Then one sergeant said, "Did y'all just see that?" They had. When the military reached the original landing site outside Willow Creek, they found no enemy force, no command structure, no survivors. Only churned mud, burned equipment, piles of shell casings, and enough empty beer cans to suggest somebody had hosted a music festival directly on top of the alien invasion. Someone had planted a hand-painted sign in the center of the abandoned zone. It read, "Y'all come back now." Below that, in smaller letters, "We got more ammo." The soldiers stared at it in silence while drone teams buzzed overhead. One lieutenant finally bent, picked up an empty can, and turned it over in his hand. It was cold. Not from weather, from recent use. The humans of Willow Creek had not fled. They had simply finished. Far off, down some unseen road beyond the pines, a banjo started playing. And every soldier there, every trained, disciplined, professional soldier of the most powerful military on Earth, stood very still and listened to it with a respect bordering on fear. Because the aliens had learned first what America was only beginning to understand. The beachhead had failed. Not because humanity fought back, because in one corner of the South, the invaders had accidentally landed in hunting country, and hunting season had opened. Like and subscribe for more stories that are uploaded regularly. Feel free to leave a comment or a suggestion about a story you would like to hear.